Some of us used to attend a church that talked about money a lot, right? And it was like they talked about it constantly. And it was like every time they got together, they took up a collection, they took up an offering, right? A donation. They were always talking about all the different needs. And here's what happened. You went to a church like that, and at some point, you got tired of it. And how do I know that? You're here, right? Not rocket science, right, folks? So you had this experience, you kind of go through this church needed your money. They talked about it all the time. It seemed like always things were breaking down. There's always a need for something new to, give for this, give for that, help us do this stuff. And I understand that, because you need money to make things happen. But here's what I also understand. You left the church that needed your money and you came here where we hardly talk about it, right? I mean, occasionally we'll say thanks for your generosity in supporting this. Thank you for you who regularly give. That's about the totality of it. And here's what the temptation is to think. This is an assumption I make about how we all think. We think, they don't talk about money, so that's right, they don't need money, right? Do you really believe that? And here's the irony of all this. We don't want to attend a church that constantly talks about money, right? Because it's terrible, right? I've been in some of those churches. It's just like, and the reality is when you're in those spots, you give because you're sort of pushed to give, kind of felt guilty if you don't give. But at some point, in fact, if you're married, maybe your spouse is like, I don't want to go to that church. All they ever talk about, all they want is our money. And every week, that church confirms that person's suspicion, right? And so I'm just tired of it. I don't want to go there. And maybe that's how you end up here. But we don't want to attend a church that constantly talks about money. And the flip side of that is, why give to a church that doesn't need our money? Because we never talk about it. You assume that we don't need your money. In fact, I'm expecting some of you to be smart enough to think this next thought. There's something we don't know. You come here and you see all the stuff we do for kids. Maybe you go down and get a free coffee before you come in. Maybe your kids stop in to get a milkshake or a smoothie after service. By the way, you can get a milkshake as an adult as well, right? It's not just for them. But, you go, you see that, you see all the programs, all the different events we have for kids. You come in here, you see the lights, you see all the screens, you see the great music we have, you see the cameras, and you're thinking, there's something we don't know, right? They never talk about money. Where does all this money come from, right? Somebody must be a lot of money floating around here somewhere to provide all this stuff. And just for a moment, I want to take a moment for those people who regularly support what we do here through our giving to our church budget, very specific about that, to giving to our church budget, because that's what happens here. That's what funds everything here. And for those of you who regularly do that, who consistently give to that, I have something to say to you today, and that's this. A big thank you. That's a big one, right? A big thank you. And I seriously mean that. We couldn't and wouldn't be able to do all the things that we're able to do if it wasn't for people like you. In fact, you're the reason we don't have to talk about money. Because you give, right? You go out of your way to find a way to give. You got to go online. You got to put an envelope, then you got to find somebody to give the envelope to. It's really hard to do that. But I'm thankful that those of you who do that, who regularly do that, that's why we don't have to talk about it. So I want to say thank you. In fact, all of us should say thank you to them because we don't have to hear about money all the time. So 1, 2, 3. Thank you. So as you leave today, that's one of your assignments. The person next to you say thank you. If they look at you like, what are you talking about? I don't give any money. He's not talking to me. Just tell them thank you anyways, right? It'll make them feel guilty. No, not where we're going. So thank you for that, because here's the reality. If you're not one of them, I have a very important question to ask you, and it's simply this. Seems like a reasonable question, doesn't it? Because here's what I, again, assume about a lot of you, because I've talked to a lot of you and heard how you feel about this place we call New Hope. A lot of you would say, I love this church. I love what it's done in my life, right? What it's done for my family. I love it's a place that, for some of you ladies, you love it that it's a place that you can bring your guy to, right? And he's going to be okay with it because, we got good music and the messages are normally relevant to life and, and he knows he's going to be there for 90 minutes or less. Because let's be honest, guys, this is the thought. Ladies, I'll give you a little peer behind the curtain. It's not a big peer, but just a little one, right? That most guys, when they're going someplace, the question they want to know is how long? How long am I going to be there? How long do I have to behave is the real question. right? And if I know it's going to be 90 minutes or less, I can do that once a week, because, hey, the music's good. I can get something, a coffee or a milkshake. The messages, they're interesting. It's kind of a good place. They don't they accept me. They don't make me feel threatened. So you would look at this church and say, I love this church because of what it's done in my life. It's a place that I can belong to, connect at, learn, and grow at. And we're glad that you love the church for those reasons. Maybe you love the music and the messages. Maybe that's what resonates with you why you come here. Maybe you love what it does for your kids, right? All the different activities and events that we have for your kids and the way we pour lots of resources in them to have a great experience, because we want your kids to love church. We want them ultimately to love God, but we also know that loving their church can help them experience the love of God. And so we do lots of stuff to help them experience that, because we want your kids when they leave to go, are we coming back to, is today the day to go to church? Is today the day we go to church? Because honestly, it's one of the reasons we give them milkshakes. We want them to be happy, right? Trying to be honest with you folks, right? Maybe you love this church because you can be involved. One of the great things about it, you don't have to be an official member here to be involved. If you want to get involved, we'll find a way for you to get involved. And maybe you love that about this place, that it isn't like I have to go through all these steps and criteria in order to belong to some place. I can just belong because I've chosen to belong. Maybe you love what it does in and for our community, because we recognize that when good things happen in our community, it's good for all of us. And so we ought to support those things. In fact, maybe you've gotten to the point in coming here, maybe you've gotten to the point where this is no longer the church I attend, the church I love. Maybe you started to call this my church. My church. And if you got to that step, that's great. Let me get back to where we're kind of been going a few moments ago. If you're going to attend a church that doesn't need your money, then you've got to come up with a giving plan to support it. Not rocket science, right? Money's got to come from somewhere, and thankfully we have people that have helped us get to this spot, and it's not like we're in desperate needs at this moment. I think it's important about once a year to talk about this idea. In fact, Jesus talked about money a whole lot. In fact, he talked about money more than almost anything else he talked about. And he also talked about the idea of planning, having a plan, making choices before we kind of before we get too involved in something. In fact, we're going to look at a statement he made in a section of his life. Context is Jesus talking to this big crowd, and they're wanting to become his followers. And, Jesus always saying, follow me, follow me. And now he's got this big crowd. Now he decides, hey, let's kind of up what I'm asking them to do. So he looks at the crowd and says, listen, if you're going to follow me, you have to, and I think it's a little hyperbole here, you're going to have to hate your mother, your father, hate your kids, hate everybody else. You got to love me more than everything, which I think catches everybody's attention, because that's a pretty dramatic statement, right? And then he goes on to explain what he means about that. And then he makes this statement. It's found over Luke's, found in Luke, it's found in Matthew as well. But in Luke's version, he says this is what happens. Jesus looks at the crowd and says, listen. In fact, he asks it sort of in a question. It could be either a question or statement. But if you want to build a tower, you first sit down and decide, calculate, figure out how much it will cost, right? That if you're going to add an addition on your house, if you're going to, build something in the back, hopefully you sit down, make some plans before you start, right? I said hopefully because I know some of you. Some of you feel like, I'll figure it out as I go along. I got some wood, I got some stuff. How hard can this be? It's not rocket science. It may not be rocket science, but it may be construction science, right? But if you want to build stuff, Jesus, it's a simple point, right? If you want to build something, you want to sit down and plan. All of us kind of do that. Don't you sit down and think about what's it going to take to get there. To see, he goes on, to see if you have enough money to finish the job. In fact, then Jesus has kind of a funny part. He says, listen, if you don't, you might lay the foundation, but you would not be able to finish. In other words, you'd just be a foundation sitting there. And then everybody who comes by will see it and go, look at there, kids, boys and girls, come here, look at this, right? Look at this guy, He started a project, couldn't finish it. That's why it's important to plan. It's a great lesson for other people, right? Not a great lesson for you. This person began to build and was not able to finish. And Jesus' point is pretty simple. It's simply, we need to think things through, right? We need to plan. We need to actually have a plan. Now, when we talk about giving and supporting a place like this, remember when I talk to people about it, and I try not to talk about it because I know how uncomfortable it is for everybody. It's uncomfortable for me. Oftentimes there's like 3 reasons somebody might say, here's why I don't give to support a place that I enjoy going to. First one would be this, haven't thought of it. right? And I can understand why you haven't thought of it, right? You come here, we never talk about it, everything works, we keep adding stuff, right? We're building a new building out there. It's like, how are they doing all this stuff? I'm great, I'm just gonna enjoy it because, hey, it's a good thing. You haven't thought about it. Here's the problem for you at this moment. Now you have, because we're talking about it, right? So I hope that one's off the table. Now you haven't thought about it. Now you need to kind of maybe think about, maybe I do need to come up with a plan, some way to actually support this thing that I enjoy. Maybe, you didn't see a reason to. Again, that might be our fault because, again, we don't talk about it a lot. If you've been around New Hope, you know how the most time we talk about it is the end of the year when we're raising tens of thousands of dollars that we're just going to give away to people who are doing really good stuff, community nonprofits that are doing really good stuff in our community because we think it's good to do good in our community. That's the time we talk about it. Maybe occasionally we'll say we're raising this for this school, or we're restocking some food pantries that we have a connection with. Bring this, you can donate some money. That's about the totality of it, outside of occasionally thank you so much. And again, I know we don't say this enough, and it's my fault. For those of you that regularly give to our local church budget, honestly, thank you. Thank you that we don't have to worry about meeting our bills, don't have to worry about funding all the things that we have going on, the things we'd like to have going. So again, thank you for that. The third reason that people would kind of not have a plan is this one. We don't think we can. Things are tight. And I understand tight. I live on a budget is like all of us do, and we know that inflation has gone up and, things cost way more than they used to cost, and we're like, how do we make this work? I understand all that. Let me just ask you another, what I hope is a thought-provoking question to think about this whole idea that we can't because things are tight. And that's simply this. What if what's true for us at home is true for us here at church? Things have gotten more expensive for you. What if they've gotten more expensive for us? How do we cover those more expenses? And if we don't have enough money, we have to cut back on stuff, and it just gets kind of there. Then we have to talk about it. And let's be honest, none of us wants us to talk about it all the time, right? It's really, what I'm talking about is simply this, the cost of keeping something we like. If you like this, we got to keep funding what we're doing or to be able to expand it. We're really just simply this. We simply need a plan, and this is not rocket science again. And my hope is that you will give some consideration to supporting on a regular basis our church budget. I'm trying to think if I ought to say something on it. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Hopefully they'll cut it later so nobody online sees it later. In our church system, a lot of churches talk about the importance of giving tithe. And I think tithe is important. I think it's something between you and God. This idea that my take on tithe, this idea that's a reminder that everything comes from God. It's a chance for us to remind ourselves every time we get our paycheck to say, thank you, God, for everything. I'm giving something back to remind myself of everything you provided for me. I think that's an important concept, a really important concept. The problem is that sometimes we think, I've given tithe, I'm all good. I've helped my local church. The reality is, directly you've helped maybe 5 families in our local church, because we have 5 pastors. That's tithe supports them. And then you've helped, there's probably another 10 to 12 families within our space here who get help because that money pays for teachers. Actually, more than 12 now that I think of all the teachers. We're probably up into the 25 to 30 range families that get helped by that. But it's helping a lot of people. It's not helping directly what happens here. Everything that happens in and through and around this space is funded by our church budget. So if you give to tithe, thank you for that. I want to say on behalf of my particular family, thank you for that. On behalf of the other 4 pastors, thank you for that. But that's all your tithe is going to here locally. It goes out from us. A little bit comes back to pay our salaries, and the rest goes up to help lots of other people. And I'm telling you that because, again, sometimes we think, well, I've done a plan, I'm giving something, and I want you to know if that's what you're giving, you haven't really helped the place that you attend regularly. That make sense? Yes. All right. Hopefully we'll cut some of that later so people above me don't get mad. So let me be real honest and straight with you as we kind of wrap this up today. If you're not willing to sit down and come up with a plan, I want to be honest of what's going to happen, all right? Because here's what we're going to be forced to do if you don't come up with a plan. You ready? Yes. We're going to be forced not to talk about money more. because again, you don't want us to and we don't want to do it, so you're not going to force us to do that. We're going to continue being a place of new hope for people, whether they give or not, because this is not a paid for playing kind of thing. We see value in just on people. If they give, that's great. If they don't, that's a personal thing, right? We'll continue to provide a place for you to continue your faith journey. If you don't come up with a plan, we're going to continue providing great kids spaces so that our kids grow up with a positive attitude towards God and to church. We're going to continue to look for ways to do good in our community, because again, when we do good stuff in our community, everybody, it's good for everybody. We're going to continue to be a relevant, safe place to bring someone that, you can bring them and know it's kind of what you're going to expect, and we're not going to try to offend anybody, point anybody out. We're going to continue to provide opportunities to live out our faith in tangible and meaningful ways, which you're smart enough people now to be thinking, well, Mike, if I don't come up with a plan, that's what you're going to do. If you're still going to do all of you're doing now, you don't need my money, right? And my answer to that is this. We don't. We have people that have, understand this, have been helping fund and keep things going. Why we don't, here's my question. What if you need to give for you? What if this is not a selfish reason, but there is a thing that happens in us. There's an attitude that changes. There's a connection that changes when we begin to financially support. When we give our hard-earned money, because I know for some of us it's really hard-earned money, to something because of the benefit we get from it. Because what if giving does something in us that nothing else will? Because I'm convinced it does. But I'm not up here to try to tell you stories to soften your heart and to change your attitude. It's not rocket science, folks. You're smart enough people, you can figure this out, right? In fact, that whole idea is based on a great teaching from a guy named Paul, who was kind of really big in the early church, wrote the majority of the part of the Bible we call the New Testament. And there's this great thing when he talks about, he sends out a letter to a church and tells them, hey, by the way, there's some folks that are going to come. They're going to take up the offering that I've asked you to put aside for this thing going on in Jerusalem. And they're going to show up. And in the midst of that, he says something pretty incredible that I don't think places like this always understand. He says, listen, over in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7. Listen, each of you should give as you have decided in your heart to give. Paul says, listen, you're the one making the choice. I'm not here today to say, hey, write out a plan, submit me something. We're not going to pass out cards, have people come visit you to know how much you're going to give. That's between you and God and you and us. In fact, he goes on and says, listen, you should not give reluctantly, and you should not give because you feel forced to give. You shouldn't feel out of compulsion. Shouldn't be any pressure on this. And then he ends with something that, again, someone like me in a place like this will often change the meaning of what this means. He ends this idea simply this way, that God loves the person who gives happily, cheerfully. And it'd be easy for me to say, see, don't you want to make God happy? It's not Paul's point. Paul is describing what you parents who have kids understand so well, right? That when your child gets up and does their chore without being asked, when they get done playing and they put their toys away and you don't have to say anything, you're like, mommy, daddy loves a cheerful putter awayer, right? You all understand that feeling, right? Because it's like, wow, they're doing it on their own. There's something great. And I think Paul's just describing, it's an observation of how God responds. It isn't like God loves the cheerful giver, so if you're not that way, he doesn't love you. That's not the point. It's just this, something happens even in God's heart when he sees people who recognize the importance of supporting something that's bigger than themselves, that helps themselves in the process. Because here's my question, what if that's true? What if it really is true that God loves those of us who give happily, who give cheerfully? Not more than somebody else, but it just does something to him. Because what if generosity isn't about money, but our attitude? So again, let me be clear, so you're all clear what we talked about today. If you don't have a plan, go home and come up with one, right? And again, I'm not going to ask you to submit anything. I just think you ought to think it through for your own sake. One, a plan that will help you give, live, and save. In fact, I think you ought to do it in that order, because I think that's what a lot of the people who contributed to this thing we call the Bible understood and taught, this idea of giving first. It's this immediate back, because let's be honest, our temptation for most of us is to live beyond our means, save if we have anything left over, and out of that, if we got anything after that, then we're going to give it, right? Because that's what we got. That's our free money, right? But what if none of the money's free? Because it isn't. You worked for it. Ultimately, it comes from someplace. I think it ultimately comes from God, that God blesses us with that. He asks us to manage it, right? And one of the healthiest ways to management is to start by saying, thank you, God, right? So we give out of that. We live. We come up with a plan for living. You know, that thing that most of us don't like, the idea of having a budget. And even worse than having a budget is sticking to the budget. That's right. And then to save. And I think you ought to save, right? I think saving is important, especially the older you get and the closer you get to this, goal line of retirement. Saving becomes really, really important, right? So let me wrap up this way. Listen, it takes money to do what we do here, right? But I'll remind you something that when I do talk about money, I remind folks of all the time. It's simply this. It's not about the money. It's about what the money lets us do. Lets us do for you, for your kids, for the people you invite with you, for our community. Because what if it really is about more than money? What if it's about us? So last thought, why not help keep something you like, something you like? Something to think about today, all right?